Once upon a time, there was a boy who, finding himself in possession of a pair of wings, wanted to race the sun in his fiery chariot. But the wax holding together his pinions melted and dropped like tears mourning his failure. The boy fell into the sea, a death so magnificent that the sun never even glanced his way. To Duck's frustration, it seemed that Fakir had become adept at avoiding her. She knew something was terribly wrong. She had gone to see Charon the other day, and the man seemed a shadow of himself. Strangest of all, for the first time since he had known him, she had seen him in his shop with his hands completely still, resting on the table as if they were mere blocks of wood. His hands were made for making, for creating. It didn't seem right to see them so empty. It was almost as if the pendant had seen the twins in sorrow with her, slowly winking a dull red to see Charon like this. Charon had looked at her helplessly when she asked if he and Fakir had patched things up. She had hoped that Charon would be able to help Fakir in some way. If anything, Fakir seemed to be doing worse. That he couldn't even bear to look at her face, merely pointing at what Duck already knew. His entire terrible situation was her fault, and on top of all the guilt, in his absence, a loneliness so hungry it began to gnaw at her heart, and it felt like no one in the world could ever ease it, except Fakir. "Dead jerk!" Duck muttered to herself in an attempt to turn sorrow into half-hearted anger. She continued climbing down the stairs of the girls' dormitory in a startling early hour. But then she hardly been able to sleep at all last night, for worry over Fakir, let alone oversleep. "He promised he'd always be with me, but he might have vanished for all I know, and it's all my fault." She grasped the fragmented pendant that hung on the tarnished silver chain around her neck. Peering intently at the shivering, broken stone, Duck missed the next step. She tumbled down the few remaining stairs, and disoriented as she tried to stand up. She thought she must have hit her head harder than usual, for standing before her was Duck. Rue gasped and embraced the dazed girl standing uncertainly before her. A thousand questions raced through Rue's mind, a myriad of horrible possibilities intermingled with joyful ones. And so she did the only thing possible in such a situation. She grasped Duck's wrist in an impetuous hold and dragged the red-haired girl behind her with a curt, "Come." Opening the door to the room she had just left, Rue ushered the two of them inside. The room was gloomy, the drapes drawn, but Rue paid no mind. She guided the other girl, but how? To the small table supporting a vase of crimson roses, and gestured at one of the chairs. While a pang of emotion she knew she could not identify, she realized that this was the first time this room had any occupant besides Rue and Princess Carre. Before Duck could recover from her tumble and shock at her own questions, with the queenliness that had always been part of her, Rue commanded, "Tell me everything." Of course, Duck had never been one to understand that she needed to bow to royalty, and that, Rue thought smiling, was what made her Duck. "Rue, you're here! I'm so happy to see you again, but why are you here? I didn't think we ever get to talk again. And why is it still dark in here? What's your favorite joking like? Do you like being a princess? Here, I'll open the curtains. It feels like a funeral or something." The Duck chattered on, tripping a little on her way to the window, struggling with the curtains. Her usual cheery, clumsy self. Rue tilted her head to the side and looked more closely. Something was amiss here. There was an edge of sorrow to this cheer. Being so familiar with that emotion and skill needed to disguise itself. She could not miss it in another. You seem to be stuck," Duck mumbled, giving another persistent tug. Suddenly, the drapes tumbled down from the window, and the curtain rod clattering loudly as it fell. Duck's mouth glinted pearly light. Duck stood back and chagrined. That wasn't supposed to happen." Rue laughed. A pleasant, merry laugh which surprised her. She had not known such laughter left in her. At the sound, Duck turned back to apologize, but the words slipped her mind as she saw some relief that the hollow look she known in the older girl's eyes had finished for the moment. "Now," Rue said, a smile still on her lips, as she gestured to the double curtains. "Now that you've taken care of that, tell me everything." Altor looked at the manuscript in his hands by the light of a single candle flame. The arrogant fool's words burned within him, and he felt a sudden urge to thrust the entire thing, without discrimination, into the flame. A giant paper moth compelled to his destruction by his hands. But he resisted, for there was nothing to be gained by such destruction, beyond the satisfaction that would disperse as swiftly as the ashes themselves. He flipped through the pages casually, yellow sheets mixed in with newer ones, covered with two hands. An older, elegant script and a younger, crabbed one. The carefully reconstructed bookcases of Drosselmeyer's study huddled around him, as if attempting to peer over his shoulders. It was a manuscript that wove decades worth of stories, generations worth of lives, beginning with the very first tale Drosselmeyer penned, the endings to his half-completed stories, inserted on the freshest of paper, and ending with the very last story Fakir spun. The night cloven in twain. Indeed. At last, Altor found the page he was looking for. Fresh sheet pockmarked within burns, as if it had been left in front of an open fire, and stray sparks had eaten away at the words at random. Yet a closer look revealed it was hardly random. The words were burnt out, just so that sense preserved, even while meaning was drastically altered. He looked over the page again, the reflection of the candle flame gleaming in his spectacles, obscuring the hunger gleaming in his eyes. It was a work of art, really, more of an art than mere writing to craft a story out of words already written. For Arthur had read closely and carefully, spending hours on choosing words to burn out not line by line. He wrote a new tale, so that word by word present and past would burn away, rewrite themselves like a phoenix rising out of his own ashes. When Fakir first left the manuscript of Arthur to safeguard it, before his brief, mysterious absence, some of the old resentment had surged up in Arthur again, and he wondered if he would forever be the gatekeeper, standing at the threshold of knowledge but never able to enter. It was hard, after all, to relinquish the dreams of a lifetime so quickly. But he had pushed down the envy and jealousy, just as he had to help Fakir receive his destiny before. And so at first, Arthur had guarded the manuscript faithfully, hiding it away in a hidden drawer in the desk. He had lovingly recreated the image of Drosselmeyer's own. After all, if nothing else, he had read the manuscript in his hands, once the hand of the author, and could not tear his gaze from it. A story that had moved the world. His fingers lingered on the ink, and he was filled with so much longing it was unbearable. And it burned there like a secret, a temptation. He could always feel the manuscript's presence, as if it were a living, breathing thing, taunting him in his inability. And the thought that had been merely a whisper in his mind at the first night grew louder. His birthright had been denied him. He had been thrust into the unwilling hands of Fakir. In an attempt to silence those thoughts, he would take the manuscript out and read it over each night. Yet with each reading, the old jealousy burned brighter, a blaze that seemed to grow by feeding on itself. His first attempt had been a furtive one. He had expected Fakir, flaming sword in hand, to descend on him as he eyed the ending of Charon's tale, smoldering twig in hand. Like care of a librarian in mending an old worm-eaten text, Arthur had meticulously burnt out a handful of words, so that a tale ending in regret, overcome by hope, merely ended in despair. Arthur had not really expected anything to happen, but he half hoped and half dreaded something would. So like a spectre of death, he kept a vigil at the old man's store every day since he had tried his hand at respinning tales. At last, something had happened. Crouching in a darkened alleyway outside the blacksmith's shop, he heard the clang of metal against stone, heard the raucous calling of a raven, and fled. A horrifying elation filled him. And after all these years of failures, he could not bring himself to believe that he had spun the tale in his own way. So he had tried fate one more time. Each attempt made his desire stronger. An intoxication that would not let him be. He looked down at the page he held in his hands. It had been a second attempt. With the careful scorching of one never, he had changed the outcome of the story. So she again lost joy in her flowers. And each time the darkest night materialized to fill the gaps in the tale Arthur had so carefully crafted. Yet Fakir dared call him a mere librarian. He would make the other boy regret his words. In fact, he was already making him regret them, though unaware. No, Fakir was no longer a writer, but a mere figure in a tale. A new story was turning its gears in Goldtown now. This time it was Arthur's. Maybe he couldn't create, but he could be the one to choose what would remain. Turning to another unblemished page, Arthur thrust the tip of a thin twig into the candle flame.